Nobody told you that the person who couldn't stay would become the reason you finally learned to. That the relationship that seemed to take everything from you was quietly, without your permission, giving you the one thing you had been outsourcing to other people for most of your adult life. The knowledge of your own worth. Not as a concept, not as something someone told you, as a lived, daily, embodied reality that you arrived at the hard way, through the specific, sustained experience of loving someone who could not reflect it back, and discovering that you did not disappear in the absence of the reflection. That discovery is not nothing. It is, in fact, the thing that changes everything that comes after. And understanding how it happened, how the avoidant, through their very inability to meet you, became the catalyst for the most important relationship of your life, which is the one you have with yourself, is worth examining honestly. Not to thank them, not to reframe the pain as a gift in a way that minimizes what it cost, but because the mechanism is real and understanding it changes how you move forward. The avoidant could not give you consistent external validation. This is the foundational fact of the dynamic. The warmth was intermittent. The affirmation was unreliable. The specific, sustaining quality of being genuinely seen and responded to with consistent warmth, the thing most people receive in varying degrees from the significant relationships in their lives and build a portion of their self-concept from, was not available in reliable form from the avoidant. This created a problem, and problems, when they cannot be solved externally, tend to eventually drive the solution inward. You could not get the consistent validation from them, and so slowly, reluctantly, with considerably more pain than should have been required, you began the process of generating it internally. Not because you chose to, because the external source was insufficient, and the alternative to internal generation was simply not having it at all. And you discovered, in the generating, that it was possible, that the worth you had been seeking confirmation of from someone who could not reliably provide confirmation was present independently of the confirmation, that it existed before the relationship and existed through the withdrawal and existed in the silence and would continue to exist regardless of whether it was ever acknowledged by the specific person you had been hoping would acknowledge it. That is self-love, not the concept version, the real version, arrived at through the specific, difficult, entirely not recommended route of having the external source fail consistently enough that the internal source had to be developed. The avoidant taught you this not by intending to and not by being good for you, by being insufficient, by the specific, repeated, pattern-driven insufficiency of someone who could not show up in the ways that would have allowed you to continue outsourcing the knowing of your worth to their response to you. There is something genuinely worth acknowledging in this that is not the same as gratitude and is not the same as minimizing the cost. The cost was real, the pain was real, and the self-knowledge that the pain produced is also real. Both things are true simultaneously. The experience was not good for you in the sense of being what you deserved or what a healthy relationship would have provided, and it produced something genuinely valuable that you now carry. Those two truths do not cancel each other out. Now, the coming back. It happens. Not always. Not on any predictable timeline. Not as a guarantee or a cosmic reward for the work of self-development, but with enough consistency to be worth examining honestly rather than simply noting as a pattern. The avoidant tends to return, attempts contact, reaches out, reappears at the edge of your awareness, precisely in the period when you have genuinely, non-strategically, actually not organized around them, stopped waiting for it. The psychology behind this is specific. While you were reaching toward the avoidant, the dynamic had a known shape. You were the consistent orientation. They were the managed distance. The relational field was structured in a way their system recognized and operated within competently. When you genuinely stop, when the reaching is actually gone, when the orientation has actually shifted toward your own life, when the warmth that was perpetually extended in their direction has been genuinely redirected, the relational field changes in a way their system registers before their conscious mind does. The ambient warmth of your orientation was providing something they were not acknowledging receiving. Its absence is felt before it is understood. The reaching back that follows is real. It is not manufactured or strategic on their part. It is the attachment system responding to the genuine loss of something it had been quietly relying on. But here is what matters most about this moment, and what the self-love you have been building makes possible that was not possible before. You can receive the reaching from a completely different position than you would have received it before. Before the work, the reaching back would have been received with the full force of the hope that the dynamic produced, with the specific, consuming activation of someone whose self-concept was partially dependent on this person's acknowledgement of them, with the rush of the intermittent reward finally arriving, with the vulnerability of someone who needed this to mean what they hoped it meant. After the work, after the genuine development of self-love that the avoidance insufficiency catalyzed, the reaching back is received differently, not coldly, not with the performative indifference of someone who is pretending not to care, with the genuine, grounded, clear-eyed reception of someone whose worth is no longer located in this person's response to them. You can feel the warmth of it without being destabilized by it, can acknowledge that the connection was real without reconstructing your life around the question of whether it will become something different, can respond with genuine care without the desperate quality of someone who needs the response to confirm something that the internal work has already confirmed. That is what the avoidance return, when it comes, actually tests. Not whether you still care, you may still care. Not whether the connection was real, it was real. It tests whether the self-love is genuinely internal now, whether it lives in you independently of their response, whether the person reaching back is reaching towards someone who knows her worth, not because they are finally acknowledging it, but because she arrived at it through the specific, difficult, ultimately transformative route of having to find it herself. The return does not validate the self-love. The self-love was already valid. The return simply reveals, in the quality of how you receive it, how far the work has actually come. And love, genuine, reciprocal, sustainably available love, becomes more possible after this than it was before. Not because the avoidant has transformed, not because the return means the pattern has changed, but because you have changed. Because the person who is now available for love is someone who knows, in the body rather than in theory, what she requires, who can read the difference between genuine presence and managed proximity, who will not spend another significant portion of her interior resources on the interpretation of withdrawal. Love is not on its way as a reward. It is not coming because you did the work and the universe is keeping score. It is more available than it was because you are more genuinely yourself than you were, more present in your own life, more capable of recognizing what is real in a connection and acting on what you recognize rather than hoping past it. That is not destiny. It is development. Real, earned, unglamorous development. That changes what is possible. Not by guaranteeing anything, by making you genuinely available for what you were always worth. The previous section ended in a place that was honest and grounded. Here is more content that stays in that register. The development is the story, not the avoidance return, not the cosmic arrival of love as reward. The actual, specific, lived development of a person who went through something genuinely difficult and came out of it with something genuinely real. That story deserves to be told accurately rather than inflated, because the inflation, however emotionally satisfying, does a subtle disservice to the person who actually did the work. It relocates the significance of the growth from where it actually lives, in the daily, unglamorous, genuine practice of knowing yourself better and acting from that knowing, to the external validation of a return or a reward. And the person who did the work deserves to have the work recognized for what it actually is, rather than for what it might eventually produce. What the work actually produces, concretely and honestly, begins with the relationship to uncertainty. Before the work, inside the dynamic, in the consuming orbit of loving someone whose availability was intermittent, uncertainty was one of the primary sources of suffering. The not knowing, the inability to read the temperature reliably, the specific wearing quality of never being entirely sure where you stood. This uncertainty was experienced as something to be resolved, something to be eliminated through enough understanding, enough patience, enough demonstration of the right qualities and the right combinations. After the work, uncertainty sits differently. Not because it has been eliminated, uncertainty is a permanent feature of genuine human connection and cannot be eliminated without also eliminating the genuine connection. but because the relationship to it has changed. The uncertainty that once required resolution now simply exists as the ordinary condition of being in relationship with a person who has their own interior, their own process, their own unknowable depths that are not fully available to anyone, including the most perceptive empath. The change is not from uncertainty to certainty. It is from uncertainty as emergency to uncertainty as ordinary. From the specific, activated, must-be-resolved relationship to not knowing, to the quieter, more grounded relationship of someone who knows her own worth, regardless of what the uncertainty resolves to. This is what self-love actually provides in practical terms. Not confidence that things will work out, not the elimination of doubt or fear or the ordinary vulnerability of caring about people. The specific, functional, daily available stability of knowing that whatever the uncertainty resolves to, you will remain yourself. Your worth will not be determined by the resolution. Your life will continue to be worth inhabiting, regardless of what any particular person does or does not do. The avoidance return, when it happens, tests this stability in the most direct way available. Because the return is precisely the thing the dynamic trained you to hope for. It is the resolution of the most persistent uncertainty the dynamic produced. It is the avoidant finally, after everything, reaching back. And everything the dynamic taught you says, this is what you were waiting for. This is the confirmation. This is the thing that means it was real. It mattered. You were right to stay as long as you stayed. The hope was not misplaced. The self-love that the work produced says something different, something quieter and more honest. It says, this is information, real information. The connection was genuine and the reaching back is genuine, and both of those things can be true without the reaching back being the resolution of anything that actually needed resolving. What needed resolving was never the avoidance acknowledgement of your worth. What needed resolving was your own relationship to your worth. And that resolution, if the work was genuine, happened independently of this moment, was already complete before the reaching back arrived. Which means the reaching back can be received with genuine warmth and genuine curiosity and genuine openness, without the desperation, without the quality of someone whose internal accounting was waiting for this to close an open question. The open question is closed. It was closed by the work, by the development, by the specific daily accumulated reality of a person who learned to know her own worth through the difficult route of having to find it herself. What you do with the return from this position is genuinely open rather than predetermined by either the hope or the self-protection. You are not required to close the door simply because opening it previously cost you. You are not required to open it simply because the reaching back confirms that the connection was real. Both of those responses, the automatic closure and the automatic opening, are organized around something other than the honest, present moment, what is actually being offered assessment that genuine self-love makes possible. The honest, present moment assessment asks specific questions, not romantic questions, not questions about whether the feeling is still present or whether the connection could be what it once seemed to promise. Behavioral questions. What is being offered, specifically, that is different from what was offered before? What evidence exists, not in the reaching back itself, which is real but is not sufficient evidence of change, that the pattern has been genuinely examined and genuinely interrupted? What has the avoidant done in the time of the silence that constitutes the interior work that genuine change requires? These questions are not punitive. They are not the questions of someone who is punishing the avoidant for the past or requiring a performance of suffering as the price of re-engagement. They are the honest, self-respecting questions of someone who has done significant work to understand both the dynamic and herself, and who is applying that understanding in real time to the specific, evidence-based question of whether what is being offered now is genuinely different from what was offered before. Often it is not. Often the return is the pattern doing what patterns do, reasserting itself when the conditions that produce the withdrawal have shifted enough to make reaching feel possible again. Often the reaching back is genuine in its feeling and insufficient in what it demonstrates about changed capacity. Often the warmth of the reconnection is real, and the underlying structure is unchanged, and the dynamic, if re-entered without the evidence of genuine change, would reproduce its familiar shape with some variation of the familiar cost. The self-love that the work produced allows you to see this clearly, without either the bitterness that would close every door or the hope that would ignore what is plainly visible. To see the return for what it is, genuine feeling, genuine reaching, insufficient evidence of the structural change that would make re-entry workable, and to respond to that accurate reading, rather than to either the fear or the longing. The response from genuine self-love is warm and clear simultaneously. Warm because the connection was real, and the person reaching is a full human being who matters and whose reaching costs something. Clear because warmth without clarity is not love. It is the old dynamic beginning again. The warmth and the clarity together constitute the response that genuine self-love produces. Not the performance of having moved on, not the collapse back into the old hope. The honest, grounded, genuinely caring and genuinely boundaried response of someone who knows what she knows and acts from the knowing. Sometimes the return is different. Sometimes, in the genuine openness of that acknowledgement, what is being offered is actually different. Not perfect, not the complete transformation of the avoidance attachment structure into something entirely new, but genuinely different in the specific, evidence-based ways that indicate interior work has actually occurred. The acknowledgement that carries something real, the directness that was absent before, the willingness to remain in the difficulty of honest conversation rather than manufacturing the exit that difficulty previously prompted. When the difference is genuine, when the evidence, read honestly and without the distortion of either hope or self-protection, actually supports the reading that something has changed, the self-love that the work produced is what makes genuine re-engagement possible. Not the desperate re-engagement of someone who needed the return to confirm their worth. The grounded, clear-eyed, nothing-to-prove re-engagement of someone who enters from a completely different position than the one they occupied before. That different position changes the dynamic fundamentally. Because the dynamic, in its familiar form, required one person to be primarily the reaching and one person to be primarily the managing of the distance between the reaching and themselves. The self-love changes the first person's position, makes the reaching no longer desperate, makes the investment no longer disproportionate, makes the presence genuinely mutual rather than asymmetrically organized around one person's availability. When both people are genuinely present, when the empath self-love has eliminated the desperate quality of the reaching, and the avoidance genuine work has reduced the reflexive quality of the retreat, the dynamic that was so costly becomes something different, not effortless, not without the ordinary difficulty of two people with their own histories and their own patterns trying to build something honest, but different in the fundamental way of two people who are both, in their respective and genuine ways, actually trying. Love, in this context, is not on its way as a cosmic delivery. It is available as the natural result of a person who has become genuinely themselves, moving through the world and encountering other people who are also, in their respective ways, genuinely themselves. The avoidant who returns changed, genuinely, demonstrably, evidence-supportedly changed, is one possible form of that encounter. Not the only form, not the form that should be waited for or organized around. One possible form among the genuine, unpredictable, nobody can schedule it possibilities that a life genuinely lived produces. The other forms are the people who were never avoidant, who bring their depth openly, who do not require the specific, costly education of repeated withdrawal to eventually demonstrate that they care, who meet the genuine self that the work produced with their own genuine self, in the ordinary, unremarkable, nobody needs to overcome architecture way of two people who are simply available to each other. Those people are also out there, also possible, also worth being genuinely available for. The self-love makes you available for all of it. For the changed avoidant, if the change is genuine. For the person who is never avoidant. For the full, unpredictable, genuinely open range of what becomes possible when you are genuinely yourself. Not as promise, not as reward, as the honest, ordinary, completely real consequence of doing the work, of knowing yourself, of acting from that knowing, of bringing who you actually are into the actual world, and letting what is actually possible find you there. That is the love that is on its way, not delivered by the universe, made possible by you, by the specific, genuine, unglamorous, entirely real work of becoming more fully yourself than you were before. That is what the avoidant, through their insufficiency, catalyzed. That is what the pain, processed honestly, produced. Not the arrival of love as destiny, the availability of love as reality, yours, actually yours, because you are actually you, finally, completely, without remainder. And that, in the honest, grounded, no elaboration needed truth of what genuine self-knowledge makes possible, is enough, more than enough. It is everything. The self-love that the avoidant catalyzed is not a consolation prize. That is worth saying directly because there is a version of this framing that sounds like making the best of a bad situation, like finding the silver lining in something that was simply painful. That is not what is being described. What is being described is a specific and genuine psychological process that produces something real. The process works like this. When external validation is consistently unavailable, the internal system that was relying on it is forced to develop its own capacity. Not comfortably, not by choice, by necessity. And the capacity that develops through necessity tends to be more robust than the capacity that develops in the presence of abundant external support, because it was built without the scaffolding, built in the specific, demanding conditions of its absence. This is not unique to the avoidant dynamic. It is a broader truth about how genuine self-knowledge tends to develop. The person who has always been met, always been validated, always received consistent confirmation of their worth from their relational environment, has access to something genuinely valuable. But they also have an untested internal system. They do not yet know whether the knowing of their worth lives in them independently of the environment that has been confirming it. The person who has been through the avoidant dynamic, who has loved someone whose availability was intermittent, whose withdrawal was chronic, whose confirmation was never reliably forthcoming, has had that testing, has discovered, through the sustained experience of the external source failing, what the internal source is actually capable of. The discovering is the development. And the development, carried forward into new relational contexts, changes everything about how those contexts are navigated. Specifically, it changes the quality of the neediness that enters the connection. Not eliminating need. Need is human and healthy and present in everyone who is genuinely in relationship with another person, but changing its quality. From the anxious, must be confirmed, organized around the other person's response quality of need that has not yet found its internal anchor, to the quieter, more grounded, I would like this, but I do not require it from you in order to know my worth, quality of need that has. That changed quality is felt by the people you enter connection with, not as a statement, not as a performance of having done the work, simply as the texture of how you are in the connection, the presence you bring, the specific, unforced, nothing performed about it quality of someone who is genuinely there because they want to be, rather than because they need the connection to confirm something they have not yet confirmed internally. The avoidant, when they return, and many do, in the various forms that returning takes, encounters this changed texture, and the encounter is disorienting in a specific way. Because the version of you they are reaching back toward is the version they left, the version that was reaching, hoping, organized around the question of their availability. That version was, in its genuine and human way, partially organized around them, around the hope of them, around the specific uncertainty of whether they would ever show up in the ways that mattered. The version that greets the return is organized around something else entirely, around her own life, around the internal knowing that was built in the absence of their confirmation, around the specific, grounded, genuinely different in quality presence of someone who has completed a significant internal development and is living from what the development produced. The avoidant reaches back towards someone who needed them in a particular way. They find someone who does not need them in that way anymore, who is genuinely glad to hear from them perhaps, who still carries warmth for what was real in the connection, but who is not organized around them, whose internal accounting does not have a line item waiting for their input to be completed. That is the specific, genuine, nothing performed about it change that the work produces. And it is not a strategy, cannot be deployed as a strategy, can only be the honest result of having actually done the work, rather than having performed doing the work in the expectation of a particular response. Love becomes available in this condition, not because it is sent as a reward, but because the person you have become is genuinely available to it in ways the previous version was not. The previous version had significant interior bandwidth committed to the management of the avoidant dynamic, to the interpretation of withdrawal, to the sustaining of hope in conditions that did not reliably support it, to the ongoing, consuming, resource-intensive project of remaining oriented towards someone who is consistently not orienting back. That bandwidth is available now, for genuine connection, for the full, present, nothing held back engagement with people who are actually there, for the specific, ordinary, genuinely nourishing experience of being in relationship with someone whose presence is consistent and whose warmth does not require earning, and whose engagement is with you rather than with the management of their own distance from you. That experience is what the available bandwidth makes possible. Not destiny, not reward, simply availability. Yours, real, built from the hardest material, and ready, finally, for what it was always capable of receiving.